Direct. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much. In fact, I first learned obstetrics ultrasound from Professor after I passed my PhD. We're working in the same institute. I'm forever grateful to him. So, I have been requested to talk about the 11 to 14 weeks aneuploidy scan. So, I've combined both. I mean, the aneuploidy, like right from MT to DBTR and then the NB, and then talking about what we can see beyond these four aneuploidy markers in a complete aneuploidy scan. So, all the images that I'll be showing today are my own done in my centers. Okay, so first, the nuchal translucency screening was first introduced in the early 1992s when Nicholas and his co-workers in London discovered that their increased, fluid in the nape of the neck in fetuses was associated with a high incidence of aneuploidies like Down syndrome, and they made it a kind of a validated screening program, and hence nuchal translucency screening as a screening program for Downs became popular the world over, and it is still so now. But then the introduction of the first trimester anti-aneuploidy screening has rekindled an interest in early anatomy scanning. Like the first trimester evaluation of the fetal anatomy and detection of anomalies became possible in the 1980s and the early 1990s, but with the advent of better resolution transabdominal and transvaginal probes, people started seeing more and more structures and discovering more and more anomalies much before the routine 20 weeks anomaly scan. And 3D and 4D may be helpful in the evaluation of abnormalities. So it was much work has been going on since then over the last 2 decades, especially the work done by Professor Mejaangkori and Pifros Nicolaitis, and you can go through these papers to understand these different aspects better. And I shall be basing my talk on whatever these stalwarts have taught us. So the main indications of an 11 to 14 week scan is first we screen for aneuploidies, then we assess the anatomy of the fetus, early diagnosis of major structural fetal defects, then of course we have to date the pregnancy around this time, and the diagnosis of multifetal pregnancies confirming chorionicity and vanicity. And also we do a uterine artery Doppler now for the early screening of preeclampsia by looking at the pulsatility index of the uterine arteries. So what are the main markers of aneuploidy? So the main markers of aneuploidy are the nuchal translucency, the nasal bone, the ductus venosus, and the tricuspid regurgitation. And it has been found that the optimal gestational age for measurement of fetal NT is 11 weeks to 13 weeks and 6 days. And when we put, it is only in this particular time span or this particular CRL, that is 45 millimeter and 84 millimeter, that these companies for dual marker test and all, they accept our NTs, because the NT has to be measured between 45 and 84 mm. So why is the NT so important? Now, there have been papers by the Nicolaitis group which has said that if we just combine maternal age, then the detection rate for aneuploidies is only 33%. And then if we do it with these biochemical markers, maternal age plus biochemical markers like beta-HCG and estradiol, and in the cortical marker test, it is only 60%. And if you just combine maternal age with NT, like we do in the FMS software, then the detection rate is almost 80%. And if you just do it with the maternal age and the dual marker test, that is free beta HCG and PAP8, and it is only 60%. But if you see that if we combine maternal age NT and the biochemical markers of free beta HCG and PAP8, then the detection rate increases to 85%. And if you combine the NT along with the nasal probe, then the detection rate increases even more. We should, in an ultrasound, we should try to get the maximum information, go beyond the NT, look at the NT, tricuspid regurgitation, and the TBS well. So why do we choose the 11 weeks? Because the chorionuclear sampling is safer after 11 weeks, and the major fetal defects can be diagnosed after 11 weeks. And because and also, if we do an earlier scan, sometimes we can see a physiological hernia, which can be a normal phenomena, and the fetal urinary bladder is also well seen at this point of time. And why do we automatically abnormal fetus is lower at the 14 to 18 weeks than before the 14 weeks? The success rate from taking measurements is almost 94 to 100%. And after 14 weeks, the fetus becomes vertical, and then it causes difficulty in making the measurements. When do we do it? Usually, don't they say that it is 11 to 14 weeks? The ideal time is around 12 weeks plus, when the crown round length is above 60 mm. So, when we start doing an aneuploidy screen, we should first start with a general overview. We look at the fetal heartbeat, we look at the number, the environment. Then we have to do the rating by doing a proper biometry, by looking at the CRL. And then after that, we have to look at the fetal anatomy. So, just a slide about biometry and dating, because all pregnant women should be offered an early ultrasound scan between 10 and 13 completed weeks to determine the gestational age and detect multiple pregnancies. Now, the assessment of gestational age at 11 to 13 weeks, the optimum is the crown round length. This is the most reliable, but we can also use the biparietal diameter. And the accuracy of dating by using the CRL is almost plus minus 5 to 7 days. And we've got to remember that after calculating the CRL, if whatever EDD we assign, that EDD becomes the EDD for the entire pregnancy. I mean, suppose as we scan later and we see that the fetus is not growing much, we cannot adjust an EDD. The EDD remains constant, but it is we only write that the growth of the fetus is 20%, 60% according to the biometry. But once we assign the EDD by looking at the CRL, we cannot change the EDD in subsequent scans. So, how do we take the correct CRL? So, firstly, we have to have a good magnification. The fetus fills almost the entire screen. We have to take a mid-sagittal section, including the profile. The spine and the rump should be visible. The fetus should be in the neutral position, in that there is some amount of fluid between the chin and the chest of the chin and the chest of the fetus. The fetus should be horizontal, and the crown and the rump should be clearly seen, and we should place the calipers correctly and place them over the head and the rump. So coming to the nuchal translucency, it is the sonographic appearance of accumulation of fluid behind the fetal neck in the first trimester of pregnancy, and the term translucency is used with respect to observed defined sensations of body in that particular translucency. And the incidence of chromosomal and other abnormalities is related to the degree of nuchal translucency, that is the thickness of the NT rather than the appearance of the NT-like sensations and all. And during the second trimester, the translucency usually resolves and in a few cases progresses into either nuchal edema or cystic hydromas with or without generalized hydromes. So this is very important, and I urge everyone who's interested in doing fetal ultrasound that you should get yourself certified from the Fetal Medicine Foundation, because even I did, you have to submit images, know how to take the proper NT, and they give you the software where you can calculate the risk. So this is the protocol given by the Kypros Nicolaides group, which is followed the world over, that the gestational period must be 11 to 13 weeks and 6 days. The fetal crown round length should be between 45 and 84 mm. The magnification should be such that only the fetal head and the thorax occupy the entire screen, and the mid-sagittal view of the face should be complete. How do we know that it is true mid-sagittal? That we see the nasal bone and the echogenic tip of the nose, then we see the rectangular pattern, the echogenic pattern, and this is the thalamus and the diacephalo, that is the brain. And if we see that even if there are minor deviations, we see the zygomatic process of the maxilla, and we should not see it. So this is a true mid-sagittal plane, and then we see the NT out here, and then we should calculate the NT. And we should also be careful not to, confuse the fetal skin with the embryo. And the neutral position is important because if the fetus chin is hyperextended, if you increase the NT falsely, and if it is overflexed, then it will decrease the NT and give a false reading. So, in continuation, we see that the widest part of the translucency must always be measured, and the measurements must be taken with the inner border of the horizontal line of the calipers placed on the on line, and the cross bar should be on the particular area, and it should be hardly visible. Now, if suppose we see umbilical cord around this, then we should take the measurements above and below, and then take an average of these two measurements as the nuchal translucency thickness. And sometimes we need to take more than one measurement, and the one which meets the maximum criteria should be used in the measurement when we put it in our FMS software when we give the report. So we see that at a CRL of around 45 mm, the maximum nuchal translucency is around 2.1, and in a CRL of 84 mm, it is around 2.7 mm, and 3.5 mm is the 99th percentile, and we have to remember that whenever we see 3.5 mm as nuchal translucency, we should always advise an invasive test. So just a few theory that fetuses with an increased NT but normal karyotype will have a higher incidence of adverse outcome, and a increased NT with a normal karyotype can be seen in major cardiac defects, musculoskeletal abnormalities, fetal infection, and other rare genetic syndromes other than the aneuploidies. And as I said, that if the NT is greater than the 95th percentile, we should include a thorough cardiac evaluation in subsequent scans. And if the NT is greater than 3.5 mm, we should always advise a invasive testing. And sometimes we see that if the karyotype is normal, then the increased NT is resolved by 20 weeks and no structural defects are seen, and the prognosis is good. So the protocol for the measurement of the fetal nasal bone is also the same position like when we are taking the NT. But the ultrasound transducer should be held parallel to the direction of the nose and should be gently tilted from side to side, so that we see that the nasal bone is separate from the skin, and we see three distinct lines. One is the nasal bone, overlying it is the skin, and another line is the tip of the nose. And these two lines, that is the nasal bone and the skin, they form an equal side. So when do we say that it is non-ossified or hypoplastic when the nasal bone just appears as a very thin line. So this is a case where the nasal bone was present in this normal one, but out here we see that there was no nasal bone and only the skin and the tip of the nose was seen. So the protocol for the assessment of the fetal tricuspid flow, similarly, the magnification should be such that the fetal thorax occupies the whole of the image, and the sample volume should be around 2 to 3 mm and should be positioned across the tricuspid valve, and the angle of inclination should be less than 30 degrees, and then we record the waveform. So this is a normal tricuspid valve waveform. So when do we say that a fetus has tricuspid regurgitation? When it is found that at least half, it occupies, the regurgitation is seen in at least half of the system and the velocity is over 60 centimeters square. Because oftentimes we see that there is some amount of regurgitation which can be physiological, and we have to remember that it has to cover more than half of the system and it has to be more than 60 centimeters per second. So tricuspid regurgitation is also seen in about 55% of cases which are T21 and 30% with trisomy 18 and 30, and in 1% of chromosomally normal fetus. And we should always follow the FMF guidelines. As I said, we should try to take the certification so that you know how to do the assessment correctly. So another part is the ductus venosus. So the gestational period must again be 11 to 13 plus 6 weeks, and the fetus should be quiet so that we can take the waveform, and the mid-sagittal view of the fetal trunk should be taken, and the first of the sample volume should be 0.5 and the insolation angle less than 30 degrees. So this is a diagrammatic representation. So we see that the fetal abdomen occupies the screen, and this is the ductus venosus coming from the umbilical vein. And we see that there is some amount of aliasing out here because it is a very thin trumpet-shaped structure where the velocity of the flow increases at this portion, and so there is aliasing, and we should choose this point of aliasing as the point where we should put our gate, and we should record the tracings. So there are three waves, E, S, E, and A, and so we see that this A wave is out here, and whenever we see that there is reversal of A wave, this is associated with cardiac abnormalities, or it can be associated with aneuploidies. So after we've seen these four aneuploidy markers, now we go to the assessment of the fetal anatomy beyond the NP. So the advantages are that we have an early detection of anomalies, early reassurance, early genetic diagnosis, easier termination if possible, and the late development. We see that fetal anomalies are evolving anomalies, and the disadvantage is that certain anomalies, especially like those of the corpus callosum, which completes its development only by 20 weeks. We cannot see these anomalies, and sometimes once we say that this 11 to 14 weeks aneuploidy scan does not detect a particular anomaly, and we see later in the 20-week scan, then there might be difficulty in counseling. So this is what the ISPOR guidelines say, that is the International Society for Ultrasound Reforms and Gynae. So they say that we have to have a checklist, and in the head we have to see whether it is present, cranial bones, midline fossa, coronal plexus, interventricles. In the neck, we have to see that it is normal appearance. It is at this point that we measure the nuchal translucency thickness. And in the face, we look at the eyes with the lens, the nasal bone, the normal profile, the mandible, and the intact lips. In the spine, we have to look at the vertebral, longitudinal, and axial, and the intact overlying skin. In the chest, the symmetrical lung field, the effusions and masses. Heart, we have to look at the regular cardiac activity, the four symmetrical chambers that have to are closed. In the abdomen, look at the stomach, whether it is present in the left quadrant, look at the bladder and the kidneys. Look at the abdominal wall for normal cord insertion, no umbilical defects. Look at the extremities, the four limbs with all the three segments, hands and feet with normal orientation. Then finally, look at the fetal environment, look at the placenta, the size and the texture, look at the cord insertion in order to exclude velamentous insertion. So, this was a paper by Singalaki where she has said that if you follow this checklist, there are certain anomalies which are always detectable in the 11 to 14 week scan, and these are acrania, exencephaly, ectopia cordis, enencephaly, holoprosencephaly, cystic hygromas, megacystis, gastroschisis of the and limb molecule complex, I shall show cases. And there are some potentially detectable anomalies with certain signs in the brain, like the open spina bifida, skeletal dysplasia, ventriculomegaly, cardiac, like double outlet right ventricle transposition of brain vessels, hypoplastic left heart syndrome, and limb reduction defects. And there are certain anomalies which cannot be detected in the 11 to 13 weeks, 14 weeks scan and detectable only in the late trimester. And that is, as I said, the corpus callosum agenesis, because the corpus callosum does not complete its development before 20 weeks. Then the cerebellar and the permeable agenesis, microcephaly, renal agenesis, echogenic lung lesions, and duodenal and small bowel atresia. So coming to the fetal head. So when we look at the fetal head, we have to look at the skull shape, the ossification, and look at the coral plexus, the thin cerebral mantle, and the fossa. So coming from top to down, these are the planes when we are doing your aneuploidy scan. These planes have to be documented in your images, and we have to report it. So the first is the transventricular plane, where we see the two thalami, which are shaped, where we see the two choroid plexus filling the almost 50 to 75% of the lateral ventricles, and it gives the shape of a butterfly, and hence it is known as the butterfly sign. And the cerebral mantle is very thin. Second, we come down and we see the two thalami, and actually the third ventricle is in between these two thalami, and from the thalami in continuation is the cerebral peduncles. So we go down a bit and we look at the two cerebral peduncles, and the aqueduct of stenosis, aqueduct of Sylvius is in between the two peduncles. And if we see here, we see that these two peduncles, if we draw a line along with them, they are convergent. And these peduncles are also a bit away from the occipital bone. Now, why it is important? Because, as I'll show in subsequent slides, when there is open spina bifida, these peduncles come and almost touch this occipital bone, and this is an indirect sign. So every plane is important. And also look at the fourth ventricle, because sometimes the fourth ventricle might be dilated when there are posterior fossa cysts, which is an early marker for posterior fossa cysts, or sometimes the fourth ventricle might be effaced when there is open spina bifida. So just a few abnormalities which we can detect is, as I said, when there is open entity, the choroid plexus fills up the entire lateral ventricle, and the cerebral peduncles, they almost reach the occipital bone. And in case of ventriculomegaly, we see that the butterfly appearance is lost, and the wings are literally dangling out here. And this is another case of enencephaly, where we see that there is no cranium at all. So when we are looking at this particular plane of seeing the fetal head and following the checklist, if we look at all the planes properly, these are the various anomalies that we can easily detect. And another is encephalocele, where there is a gap in the occipital bone and we see brain tissue protruding out. So this was a case of a Meckel-Gruber, where there was an occipital encephalocele. So coming to the very important plane when we are doing our NT is the mid-sagittal plane of the fetal face and the brain for the NT. But this particular Ravi Chowdhury and all these various stalwarts, they found that when they were looking at the fetal NT, there were many other structures which were giving them indirect signs and hinting towards many abnormalities. So if you look at the NT, this NT plane, you see that this is the nasal bone, then this is the brainstem, and then there is a translucency out here, which is the intracranial translucency, which is the fourth ventricle. This is the choroid plexus, and then this is the cisterna magna, and finally we come to the nuchal translucency. So the intracranial translucency, the importance was first discovered by Ravi Chowdhury, and his colleagues, and they said that the fourth ventricle presses as an intracranial translucency between the brainstem and the choroid plexus. So this I think it increases with fetal CRL, and it is around 1.5 at a CRL of 45 mm and 2.5 at a CRL of 85 mm. Now why is this intracranial translucency important? Because in case of open NTD, what happens is that it starts losing fluid. So this fourth ventricle starts losing fluid, and this fourth ventricle becomes effaced in case of open NTD. And when we see that there is no intracranial translucency, we should immediately look at the fetal spine to look for any spina bifida. So another thing is that they found out was the BS-BSOB ratio. So what happens is that brainstem is the thickness of the brainstem, which is normally seen, and then BSOB ratio, BSOB is the distance between the brainstem and the occipital bone. Now normally what happens when this intracranial translucency is there, so this brainstem thickness is less than the BSOB length, So because the intracranial translucency is present, but what happens when the intracranial translucency is lost? This when it is effaced, this brainstem thickness increases, and hence this BS increases and this BSOB decreases. So normally, as I said, this BS-BSOB ratio is 1 or less than 1, but in case of open spinal bifida, this fourth ventricle or the intracranial translucency is effaced, then the BS-BSOB ratio increases. So this is another indirect sign for open spina bifida. Then, as I said before, the parallel cerebral peduncles. In case of a normal fetus, the two cerebral peduncles, the line drawn along the two cerebral peduncles, they converge. But in case of an open spina bifida, as the cerebral peduncles go and almost touch the occipital bone, we see that these two lines, they are parallel. And this is also another sign for open spina bifida. So every plane is important. So two other signs, not very important, but I would just like to make a mention of it, not many use it, is that the BPD also decreases in case of open spina bifida. It goes to less than 5th percentile. So if we take a ratio of the BPD to the total abdominal diameter, then the ratio decreases, that is, it becomes less than 1. And another is the frontomaxillary angle, which is the angle between the upper surface of the maxilla and the frontal bone, which is increase in case of aneuploidies, but it is decrease in case of open spina bifida. So, in short, these are the indirect signs when we are looking at the fetal head beyond the MT. In the mid-sagittal section, we see that there is obliteration of the intracranial translucency, the brainstem and the BSOB ratio, it is greater than 1, and the frontomaxillary angle is decreased. And in the axial section, we see that there is again obliteration of the IT and the cisterna magna. The cerebral peduncles are parallel, and the posterior there is posterior shift of midbrain and the aqueduct of Sylvius, and there is no fluid in the lateral ventricles, and also the BPD is less than the 5th centile. This is a paper which is not used, and I don't have a case to show, when this was borrowed by one of my teachers. So they have said a few studies have shown that the midbrain and the fox, there is a ratio. So normally the fox thickness is more and the midbrain thickness is less. But then in case of ACC, the midbrain diameter is higher and the fox diameter is lower, and this midbrain to fox diameter is higher in case of agenesis of corpus callosum. But frankly speaking, it is not very much used, and we usually depend on that 20 weeks anomaly scan to look at the size of corpus callosum agenesis. So while we were talking about effaced intracranial translucency, sometimes we see that the intracranial translucency might also be widened, and this is an early marker for posterior fossasis. So this was a case of T21 with it had the posterior fossasis with an enlarged intracranial translucency, megacystis, and a lot of other findings, and I shall show it towards the end of my talk. So another sign in that very plane, which was discovered by Professor Chowdhury, was the maxillary gap sign. That while we were still looking at the nuclear translucency, we also see the echogenic, rectangular echogenic hard palette. And so, if we see a gap in this particular palette, then we can suspect cleft palate, and this is an early marker. But then we've got to remember that in certain cases, a very minimal amount of gap might be present in normal cases. And then, but this is an indirect sign, and we have to suspect and follow up later. So this was discovered by our very own Lakshmi Selvaraj of Tamil Nadu. She has been doing fantastic work on cleft lip palate, and she's renowned the world over. So she discovered the superimposed line sign in this very plane of the mid-sagittal plane, where she showed that when we look at the palate, we see that in normal fetuses, the posterior aspect of the maxillary line, it appears bifid, and cranially it is formed by the bone, and inferiorly, caudally is the secondary hard palate. So what happens? In cleft lip, suppose we see only one line, and in cleft palate this will be absent. So instead of two lines, we will see only one line. So that was the sign that she discovered. So coming to the fetal face, so what are the things that we see in the fetal face? We look at the forehead, that it is of normal shape, not too flat, not excessive muscle, no structure protruding. And we have to look at the nasal bone and see that the nasal bone is ossified. Then it is very important to look at the maxilla, see that the maxillary, there is no maxillary gap. And in the mouth, we can look at the upper and the lower lips. But it is very important to document this retronasal triangle, RNT, which we give in most reports, that this is formed by the two maxillary processes. And then this is the palate, this is the maxilla, and these are actually the mandibles. Because when we are taking it in a coronal plane, we have to see this palate, but these make up only the rami of the mandible, and hence we see a gap in between. And this is a normal finding, this mandibular gap sign. Suppose we do not find this mandibular gap sign, it shows that it is the chin which has receded in the same plane as the palate, and then we have to suspect microglantia. So this documenting this RLT, the retronasal triangle, is very important, because first we can look at any gap in this palate, in the maxilla, and also we can document micrognathia or retrognathia by seeing that the mandibular gap is absent. So this is what I was talking about, the retronasal triangle. And in case of micrognathia, we see that this mandibular gap is absent. So finally we come to the fetal neck. So in the fetal neck, what do we document? We look at the NT following all the FMF parameters, and sometimes we can see cystic dilatations on either side of the neck, and these are jugular lymphatic sacs, which are also markers towards trisomy 21, but it is not seen in all cases. Sometimes it can be seen in normal cases as well. From the neck, we come to the spine. So in the spine, we look at the vertebral alignment and integrity, and then also we look at the intact overlying skin. We look at it at the sagittal plane, the coronal plane, and the axial planes. So we see that sometimes there might be gap, or we might find myelomeningocele at the very early stage. This was an 11 weeks fetus with OEIS, that is ophthalmosine extrophy, and okay. So when we are looking at the fetal head and spine, so this was just to document that we have to see the choroid plexus. Normally we have to see the butterfly sign with the choroid plexus and the echogenic interhemispheric fissure and the fox. But in case of when we do not see it, we do not see the intervening fox, we see the monoventricle, there is fusion of the midline structure. So this was the case of holoprosencephaly. Even when we look at the sagittal plane, we see that it is all defective. There was no nasal bone present. There were no eyes present. Another case of acrania or anencephaly, where there was complete absence of the fetal head. And we see that the facial structures are normal out here. We can see the eyes, we can see the mandible, but we do not see the fetal head. And 3D does help, giving a better perspective to the parents, so that they can make an informed decision about termination of these pregnancies. This was a case of anencephaly with anencephaly. So, anencephaly is actually a fixed retroflexion of the fetal head, and there is a fusion of the cervicothoracic vertebra, and this is known as the stargazer's posture. So, from the head and neck, we come to the fetal heart and the chest. So, in the fetal chest, we have to document the 2 echogenic lungs, and we have to document the 4-chamber heart. And while we are looking at it in the grayscale, we also have to see the septum in between the 2 chambers. So we see that the lungs are seen echogenic on either side of the heart, and this was a case of a congenital diaphragmatic hernia, where we see that the stomach was pushed into the thorax and the heart was pushed on one side. And so this was an early diagnosis, and then we look at it in a coronal section, and we see that the stomach was pushed almost in the thorax, and there was no stomach bubble present in the abdomen. So what do we document in the heart? We look at the situs, and we look at the symmetry of the 4 chambers and the cardiac activity. So situs is that when we are documenting the stomach bubble in the abdomen, we also have to see that the heart is on the same side of the stomach. So in the 4 chamber, we look at the parallel inflows and the cardiac axis, because an abnormal cardiac axis at this point of time will point towards many cardiac anomalies, and we have to document the plane at the level of the 3 vessel view. So all the images that I'm showing are what we always document when we are doing an aneuploid discharge. So when we have to give images of the fetal heart and chest, these are the either of these 2. We have to document the parallel inflows, and we have to show these outflows, which can be seen as either the V sign or the tick sign. So these so while we are looking at the fetal heart, we document the flow across the tricuspid valve just in that setting, and I've shown you the protocols how to take it. So this was a case of reversed airway. In a case of this was a case of a TR. This was a case of TR where there was a systolic velocity of greater than 60 centimeters. And we can see that there was some amount of hydrops also in this patient. And even in this color, we can see this tricuspid regurgitation happening. So, from this chest and heart, we can look at the abnormal cardiac position in the chest. The hypoplastic left or right ventricles can be documented. We can see single ventricles, ventricular disproportions, large septal defects, arrhythmias, pericardial effusions, and diaphragmatic hernias, as I've shown. So this was a case of hypoplastic left right heart, which I detected at almost it was I think 12 weeks. Yeah, you can see that in the 4 chamber, the RV was very small and the LV was very quite prominent, and there was also a VSD amongst communication between the 2 chambers. And later on in the 20-week scan, she was found to have tricuspid, dysplasia with leading to the hypoplastic right heart. Sometimes in the when we are looking at the outflow tracts, we can also see an aberrant right subclavian artery. Now the aberrant right subclavian artery is a marker, soft marker only in the 20-week scan, but we can see it even in an early scan. This was a case of trisomy 21. I mean, she was later on when we saw the aberrant ARSA, and then we saw an increased thickness. Later on, she did her NIPT, and it turned out to be trisomy 21. So we can detect ARSA at almost 11 weeks. In the fetal abdomen, we have to document that the stomach is on the left side, and we have to see the normal cord insertions, both in the axial and the sagittal planes. And these should be documented by 12 weeks usually. So even in this plane, we look at the umbilical vein with the ductus venosus, and I've shown how to take this measurement. So we can see A wave reversal, sometimes the ductus venosus might be absent. So we can see that when we are looking at this plane, we see this aliasing happening, and this is the point where we should take the sample. So when we are looking at the abdomen, fetal abdomen, we have to remember physiological gut herniation. It occurs, starts from the 6th week and returns to the abdomen by the 11 to 12 weeks. So this is a normal case. We saw it at 9 weeks, and we see that there is an omphalocele, but this is usually physiological hernia is usually 7 mm. It usually exceeds. This does not exceed more than 10 mm. It does not contain liver, and it rarely persists beyond 12 weeks. But when we see a physiological hernia like this, we should always follow up at around 14 weeks, because we never see a physiological hernia at 14 weeks. So this was a case of an omphalocele, which is herniation of abdominal viscera through an enlarged umbilical ring through the base of the umbilical cord. And here we see that the cord always inserts directly onto the apex of the sac. And sometimes it contains small bowel and the liver. And this is the 3D of the same. Gastroschisis is different from omphalocele. Here the umbilical cord is intact, the insertion into the umbilicus is intact, and it is the defect in the abdominal wall which occurs in the paramedian aspect, and we see that the bowel protrudes out. Body stock anomaly. This is we see that there is complete evisceration of the abdominal contents, and they adhere to the placental surface. The cord insertion cannot be found out properly. No free floating loops of cord seen. Sometimes we may see kyphoscoliosis, and it can contain liver, bowel, and there might be associated anomalies of the limb. And so this was the terminated case of body stock anomaly, which is a very severe form of abdominal wall defect, which can be detected at around. So another case of OEIAS. This is an omphalocele, bladder extrophy, imperforate anus, and a spinal defect. So this case was almost diagnosed at 11 weeks. We saw that there was a myelomeningocele, the ND was increased. We saw that the IT was effaced, and there was no bladder was seen, and instead there was a sac-like structure, a bladder which was seen outside, and there was a omphalocele. So from the fetal abdomen, we have to document the fetal kidneys. These are bean-shaped, slightly echogenic, with a hypoechoic central renal pelvis. And sometimes, if we look clearly, we can even document the hypoechoic adrenal glands on the superior aspect of the kidneys. So we can detect, multicystic dysplastic kidneys at a very early stage. So this was a case where we see that, both the kidneys had multiple cysts, and both seen in axial and the transverse plane, and we did a 3D of it, and the cysts can be very seen, the kidneys are enlarged. So from the kidneys, we come finally to the lower abdomen and the pelvis. So we have to document the fetal bladder, which should be visible by 12 weeks. And we should see the two umbilical arteries bordering the urinary bladder. We should see it in, we should document the length of the urinary bladder, because usually it is less than 7 mm, and if it is more than 7 mm, we say that it is enlarged. Sometimes the urinary bladder might be absent. But even if you don't see it, we have to see that the urine, the bladder filling and emptying has a cycle of almost 55 to 155 minutes. So sometimes 30 minutes also. So, suppose in the initial part of the scan, we do not see the urinary bladder. Before saying that it is an absent urinary bladder, look at the fetus at least after an hour. And if it is still not present, then we have to look at the kidneys properly. And if we do not see the urinary bladder, then we can say that the bladder is non-visualized. So this was that same case of multicystic dysplastic kidney. The kidneys were non-functioning. As a result, no urine was formed, and we did not see the urinary bladder. But at this point, I would also like to say that the kidneys start giving, contributing to the amniotic fluid from 10 weeks onwards. But even in case of very severe renal diseases, even in an early stage, before 16 weeks, we see that the amniotic fluid is normal. Why? Because at this point, the placenta is also contributing to the amniotic fluid by diffusion. And it is only, when this diffusion stops after 20, 22 weeks, that when we have kidney diseases, we actually see anhydramnios or oligohydramnios. But till around 20 weeks, 22 weeks, we can see that in spite of having kidney pathologies, bilateral kidney pathologies, the amniotic fluid might be normal. So, megacystis is 7 to 15 mm, and it is seen in only 20% of aneuploidy cases, and 90% cases show spontaneous resolution. So we should call these patients for follow-up. But if it is more than 15 mm, like in this case, we have to suspect lower urinary tract obstruction, because such a large amount of obstruction or enlargement of bladder is only seen in 10% of aneuploidies, and usually such large bladders do not resolve, and we have to follow up in the second or the third trimester. So this was a case of a prune belly or an eagle-barrel syndrome, where there is lax abdominal walls, extensive megacystis, and it can also be associated with aneuploidy. This is a case of prune belly syndrome in 13 weeks, 5 days, where we see that enlarged urinary bladder. Sometimes we can see a dilated posterior urethra, gross pelvic anisale and ureteral dilatation, and abnormal anterior abdominal wall. Coming to the fetal extremities, this is the best time to see all the 4 extremities. When you're doing your 11 to 14 week scan, try and document both the hands together, both the legs together, so that there is a documentation that both the limbs are, all the 4 limbs are present. Because sometimes when we are doing our 20 weeks anomaly scan, we tend to get confused, between the right and the left limb, and we tend to, document the same limb repeatedly. So if we have documented that the 4 limbs are present in the 11 to 14 weeks anomaly scan, then we are safe. So sometimes, if our transducer is good, we can even document the fingers, all the 5 fingers. We can look at all the 5 toes, look at the angle of the feet in relation to the neck. So this was a case of Emilia and Meromelia. I have 2 cases. One turned out to be a amniotic band syndrome, where we see there was a thin, band. But amniotic bands are usually, you have to increase the gain. Whenever we see limb defects, we always have to look for amniotic bands and try and increase the gain. And here we see that there was a band, from the amnion, which was causing disruption of the vascular supply, as a result of which part of this limb was missing, and this was very well seen in 3D. And this actually was a case where there was no amniotic band, there was an increased NT, and when we did the amniocentesis, it turned out to be a 16 PQ deletion, which was very uncommon. And so we can see that certain unknown aneuploidies, where aneuploidies can also show amelias and meromelias, like it was in this case. Amelia is when we do not see the entire limb, which was in one limb was totally missing, and one of it was only present halfway. Sometimes if we can count the fingers, we can also see polydactyly. This was a case of a Mejaangkori syndrome, where we saw multicystic dysplastic kidneys, but then there was also polydactyly, and which was well documented. I've already showed the amniotic band syndrome, so this was the same case. So I'll just show a few cases just to see that, in the 11 to 14 week scan, we can have a constellation of findings which help us arrive at a syndrome or a diagnosis. So Mejaangkori's are lethal autosomal recessive. Unfortunately, this was the 3rd pregnancy of the patient, and her earlier pregnancy also had the same problem, and even when she came for her third pregnancy, though it was autosomal recessive with just 25% recurrence rate, she still had this problem here. And so this is characterized basically by posterior fossa anomaly, which is the occipital encephalocele. There is post-axial polydactyly and multicystic dysplastic kidneys. It is complicated by severe oligohydramnios and anhydramnios towards the later part, in the second trimester. So after this, we look at the fetal, and we need to look at the fetal environment also, because sometimes we can document fibroids. We look at the placenta, we see if there are any subchorionic bleeds or whether there are any myomas, and we have to document them because low-lying myomas can sometimes cause obstruction in labor, and a large amount of subchorionic bleed might have a bad prognosis. Document the cervix, both in trans-abdominal and trans-vaginal if possible. So, towards the last, we have to document the uterine artery. You look at the uterus and the cervix in the sagittal plane, and then the cervical and the internal os should be identified. And as we take our probe from side to side, we document both the right and the left uterine arteries, and the pulse wave Doppler should be with the sampling gate at around 2 mm, and we have to document at least 3 consecutive waveforms and document the PI. I won't talk much about multiple pregnancy because, but when we have to look at the number and just determine the chorionicity, because in case of DCVA during pregnancy, we see that the membrane is pretty thick. There is a lambda appearance because of thick placental tissue, and this is known as a lambda sign. But in case of MCDA, that is monochorionic diamnitic twin pregnancies, this membrane is very thin. There is no intervening tissue between the membranes, and this is known as the T sign, and this is a sign of a monochorionic diamnitic twin. And this was a case of a twin reverse arterial perfusion, which was also discovered as detected at around 12 weeks. Ultimately, she went for RFP because it was a twin pregnancy. So just one case. So this was a 13 weeks post IVF case, and her dual marker also showed intermediate risk of trisomy 21. The CRL was around 80 mm. We see, like in a mid-sagittal, when you're doing a CRL itself, we detect so many findings. Like we see that the NT is increased. There is a megacystis, and in the first look, we see that the IT is also widened. So the NT was, on a closer look, we found that the NT was 3.8. The nasal bone was present. The palate was normal, but then the IT was widened. And in the coronal section, we see that there was a posterior fossa cyst. The ventricles were dilated, so if there was a ventriculomegaly, the choroid plexus were dangling instead of the butterfly sign. We also saw jugular lymphatic sacs in the same patient, along with their megacystis. Megacystis showed the dilated posterior urethra. The pelvic calyceal systems in the kidneys were dilated. So this was a 3D which was done. Finally, the patient decided to terminate. So the take-home message is that when you're doing an 11 to 14 week scan, you should always try to follow the FMF guidelines for an NT, nasal bone, the ductus venosus, and the TR for accurate measurements. You follow a checklist. Beyond that, you always have to look at the fetal anatomy, follow that checklist. But we've got to remember that the first trimester ultrasound examination of the fetal anatomical survey does not replace the traditional second trimester ultrasound, but rather complementary to it, especially in a high-risk pregnancy. Then we have to inform a couple of these limitations when we are doing and documenting or reporting any anomaly. And also remember that an increased nuchal translucency at 12 weeks is not an indication for termination, but it is an indication for further workup or follow-up. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Regina. I think all of you have two lectures. We did 2 lectures. One is anti-scan and
I combined it.
So we have seen how beautiful photographs are there. But it's very difficult to, whenever you see the practical episode, you see that it's very difficult to test the baby. Because it moves such a way that it is very difficult to take that, even antis can also be. So, again, the theory, after this lecture, we'll have some practical demonstration. We have got some invasive procedures in the afternoon session. So to that, for some family problem. So we have practical demonstration of first trimester scan. In the meantime, breakfast is ready now. What is it ready? Breakfast ready. The breakfast ready is how? Breakfast ready. Huh? Okay, you can have your breakfast, then you can have breakfast. Thank you so much. There is a slide for Zina. Most of us know her. She is doing very good job on connectivity. We can join her. We can ask her at any moment. We will send a number in the group. Any discussion will be after. After then practical.
You have to eat. Yes, ma'am.
Hello? No. Go say. Breakfast go say. You know, I had ready go. लेकिन इतना ही से. अब?
मैं कहा not much here. Not much. Can you do for myself?
Like, ये 8 8 is there. इसका नाम क्या होता है? फिर क्या क्या होता है? ना आगे भी क्या दिक्कत है? आगे क्या? तो क्या दिक्कत है? Right? Right, that's all. Okay. Hello. Hello. Can you hear me? Okay. So this is not a case for 11 to 13 weeks. She's only 8 weeks 4 days by her LFT. So, we were 100% maybe I should just talk a bit on the protein scan. So, when a patient comes with around 8 weeks, what are the things that we see? Firstly, we basically see the diet, we look at the overview of the entire uterus. We see the number of sacs and the number of fetuses. To be our embryos to be more precise, because before 10 weeks it is an embryo and after 10 weeks it is a fetus. So what are the things that we see in this scan? First, we have to document only the ground length. The embryo should be horizontal as possible. Always try to zoom the image. So our CRN is corresponding with her gestational age, which is given by her LLP. So here we do not need to correct or assign a new ECG. According to the American College of Obstetrics and Gynaecological guidelines, that till 11 weeks, 10 weeks, if the difference, a difference of 3 to 5 days is allowed. So if the difference up to around 9 weeks, if the difference is 3 days, then between the menstrual age, that is according to her LFC and what is seen according to her CRN, then we can assign her EDD according to the LFC or the CRN, whichever we choose. But then, if suppose in this case the CRN would have been more or less, with a difference of more than 3 to 5 days, then we would have had to assign a new EDD and a new CRL, I mean a new LFT and a corrected LFT. Also, in this early scan, we have to document the intracranial, we see a lucency in this head, which is known as, it is the lucency of the London capillary. And we always have to document this because this is a indirect feature of the normally developing ventricular system and the head. We do not see the urinary bladder at this point of time. The urinary bladder lucency always is seen after 10 to 11 weeks. We can see the small lip cuts. And we've got to remember that we can use color at this gestational age, but before 10 weeks, please do not use spectral Doppler, that is, do not use pulse wave Doppler. Always document the fetal cardiac activity by using the air mode. Never use the spectral Doppler. So 165 is normal. Usually, 120 to 180 is the normal heart rate. But below 100 is bradycardia, and we've seen that, if you document embryo which is showing a heart rate below 100, then it is, we have to follow it up properly, because oftentimes we find fetal demise at when we scan again at 11 weeks or so. Also, when we see tachycardia, usually more than 180, it also, is an indirect marker for Turner's trisomy. And sometimes we have to document this. So in this case, sometimes when we are doing this, this is the yolk sac. This is the yolk sac. And sometimes we can see another cyst-like structure in the umbilical cord, which is an umbilical cord cyst. We can see that around 8 weeks or sometimes 11 or 12 weeks. And then when we see an umbilical cord cyst, it is usually transient, especially if it is a single one. But sometimes if it is more, and sometimes if it persists, then these are also inherent signs for trisomy. But when we see an umbilical cord cyst out here, just make a mention of it, but just write that umbilical cysts, solitary umbilical cord cysts are usually transient and they need to be followed up. So in this scan, it is just important to document the heart rate, whether whether the fetus is viable or not, and then look at the intracranial, and there's a translucency, cranial translucency, look at the lymph bulbs. Sometimes we might see a small herniation in a bit of bigger fetuses, like in a 10-week fetus or something, which is the physiologic hernia. If you see it, we've got to document. Then at this stage, also always look at the fetal environment, look at the two adnexa, and look at the two adnexa and the ovaries to rule out heterotopic pregnancies, because sometimes in one in around 30,000 to 50,000 pregnancies, especially if a patient has done IVF or assisted reproduction, sometimes we might find another pregnancy in the adnexa, so it is very important to rule out that. Then look at the cervix and document the length, because sometimes we might see dilatation of the cervix, and finally sometimes the cervix might be shortened. I think that's all in the for an early scan. This is all we've got to document. The intracranial translucency, the lymph bulb. Just remember that never put the spectral Doppler on, always put the end to document the cardiac activity. And this is also important for grouping, where a difference of up to 3 to 5 days is acceptable. Beyond that, you have to assign new CPs and new LMPs. Also, look for upward hemorrhages, usually more than 60 to 75, common more than 60 to 75 of the circumference. Then it is like it carries the poor prognosis at times. So this is the developing placenta, so we get the So can you hear me? Yeah. So this is the 11 to 14 weeks that when you see that the baby is very active. So while I can, let me just take the CRN. So the baby has to be in a horizontal position. When we are taking a CRL, we should take it in the mid-sagittal plane. Oh my goodness. So, and the chin, and we can see that it's in the neutral position because there is fluid in between the chin and the chest, but this is not too sagittal because I still cannot see the Gynaecological and the IT properly. But nevertheless, I'll just save this for the meanwhile. Yeah, this is better. So when we are taking the CRL, see that the fetus occupies almost the entire screen. The crown, the crown and the rump are identified. Don't include the limbs in your measurement. We see that we can see the nasal bone, we can see the diencephalon. This is the echogenic choroid plexus, and this is the intracranial translucency. That is the fourth. The future four ventricles in between the diencephalon, that is the thalamus, the midbrain, and the medulla oblongata. And this is the cisterna magna, and this is the occipital bone. And so this is the nuclear translucency which we calculate. But this is for now is the proper plane for the CRL. So we'll now first measure the CRL from the crown to the left, from to the rump, and this is 54.6, which corresponds to 12 weeks. Okay. So this is the usual translucency. We have to take a few measurements because I go for the best one. So this looks fairly ideal. So I must I'll just take this also in case I don't get it later. So out here also we can, the diencephalon is not very clear, but we see the intracranial translucency, we see the nasal bone, and we see the skin, which is the parallel, the equal side and the echogenic tip of the nose. And we measure the NT, we have to put a crossbar such over the posterior part of the occipital zone, and the cross, one should be here and one should be here, so that the part where it crosses should be where we take it. So it is. So I'll take another one. Always take the widest part of the NT. This is 1.1. The NT is 1.1, and out here, what are the other things we will see? We will see the intracranial translucency. This is the IT, I just labeled it so that you can see properly. This is the NT. This is the thalamus, the midbrain, the medulla oblongata. So this is the brain stem. This is the IT. The nasal bone and the skin on top. You see that this is the hard palate, and when we just double our transducer, we will see that it forms a V. The NT, the magnification should be such, and here the resolution is a bit. But you see that actually this maxillary palate, it has the maxillary line bifurcates into two, one out here and one out here. So that's why because the missile show the IT, the NT, and so this is the true sagittal plane, and this is the box, the midbrain. So this is the BSOB diameter which we see. This is the brainstem, And this is the brainstem occipital diameter. So when the IT is properly seen, when the IT is intact, then this BSOB measurement is more than the thickness of the brainstem. So this ratio is less than 1. But when this IT gets effaced in case of open spina bifida, then this BS, the brainstem becomes thickened and hence this ratio increases. So this is the nasal growth. And this is how you got to take a NT image. We should not see the zygomatic process of the maxilla out here. So from the NT, the other aneuploidy marker that we see is the ductus venosus. We see the aliasing out here and place your gate out here and document the ductus venosus. So document the various measurements because when we are putting it in the FMS software for risk calculation, then they ask for these measurements of the ductus venosus as well. So as I said, when we are calculating the ductus venosus, always magnify the image, look at the point of the maximum aliasing and put the waveform out there and this is the ductus venosus. So the main waveforms are, this is S, this is D, and this is A. Now when this A, that is the atrial contraction, when it goes and comes, when it reverses beyond the baseline, then it is called reversal of A wave. And this is also a marker for some either aneuploidy like some trisomy, or if the karyotype is normal, then we have to follow up because it can point towards some future cardiac anomaly. So we record the ductus venosus and we always have to record the various measurements. So after the ductus venosus, so we have recorded 3 aneuploidy markers. Now look at the fetal heart. Look at the situs first. This is the stomach. And we see that the heart is also, the apex is pointing towards the stomach, towards the left, so the situs is normal. We have to try and document this sector. So we know that this is the left side and this is the right side, and it is the tricuspid valve is here. So place your spectral Doppler over this tricuspid valve, and this is the waveform that we ought to see normally, and a little bit of regurgitation is okay. Sometimes this is physiological. So document the heart rate. So after looking, so these are the 4. So once we've excluded these aneuploidy markers and we've seen that they are all normal, then we do a detailed fetal overview. So we start with the fetal head. We want to try another. Just try another group. I can. This is also good enough, but he said we have a better group. Practical points. How is that going to figure out this? Yeah. Which one? The IM6. Is it? Okay. So what's your name? Apurva has given me a special 3D IM6 probe. He said that resolution is going to be even better. It looks good. Yeah. So we start with the fetal head. So as I said before, we look at the butterfly sign. These are the choroid plexus. This is the box in between. and the coron plexus usually occupies 50 to 75% of the lateral ventricle. Okay, and the cerebral canthal now is quite thin, and we have to look at the shape of the head, the impactness, whether there is any grade, whether there is any encephalocele. We go a bit down, we document the thalami. The two thalami out here, and the third ventricle is in between these two thalami. And even at this point, we have to document the BPD because when we are putting our, these are certain measurements you have to take if you are using the FMF software, which is given by the UK FMF UK Foundation. So the BPD is showing 12.5, I mean 12 weeks, 5 days. So, yeah. So from the thalamus, we come to the two peduncles. So these are the two peduncles. Cerebral peduncle, the aqueduct of cilius is in between them. So we see that the posterior border of the peduncles are a bit away from the occipital bone, which is normal. And the line, if you draw lines across from the thalamus along the peduncles, we see that they converge towards each other. If they were parallel, then we would have to suspect open spina bifida, and even in case of open spina bifida, this cerebral peduncles, they almost reach up to the occipital bone. Yeah. So, we are done with the fetal head. Now we go to the fetal face. So, as I said earlier, we have to look at the retronasal triangle. Document the retronasal triangle. We've already seen the mandible in the vaginal plate. You know. Patient को दवा देगी कुछ भी तुम्हारा कि बात ब्लैंकेट पर की बात दी गया Come. Just a moment, the patient is feeling a bit uncomfortable. So, this is the palate, and these are the mandibles, and we see a mandibular gap in between them, and we have to document this retronasal triangle. And these are the two eyes which we see in the coronal plane. All these features are always better documented in a transvaginal, and since this is a workshop, we can't do a transvaginal, but try and document it in a transvaginal, where we see the features even more clearly. So look at the feature neck. Look at the fetal spine in coronal, in axial, the fetal abdomen with a stomach bubble. Look at the cord insertion. Yeah, this is the cord insertion. Because sometimes we might see omphalocele and gastroschisis in this here. Look at the fetal bladder. And document the two umbilical arteries on either side of the bladder. Okay. Just a moment. Okay, we document the umbilical arteries again. Sometimes one umbilical artery might be a bit smaller than the other. But if we cannot see it in a transabdominal, we should always confirm it with a transvaginal scan. Okay, we'll take a look at this later. Coming to the fetal heart, we have to document the two inflows and the outflows. The color is not picking up. Yeah. So we see that there are two inflows. I mean, the setting should be such that we can separate the septum two parallel inflows. Yeah, these are two parallel inflows. And go cranially and try and document the fixed side. Okay. So, here's some images, no? Before. Yeah. So this is actually the outflow which we've got to document. Here we see. And then document the limbs. And then we can do it transvaginal. I'll show you how to do the uterine artery. It's always important to document the legs. The two limbs. Just change. Oh. So we document the two limbs. They are being bent. Yeah. So we can see the two limbs and the angulation between the leg and the feet. The angulation between the leg and the feet are also normal. So these are the lower limbs. And this is one upper limb with the fingers. And this is the other one. The digits, these are two bones on the forearm. And so, yeah. So these are the two lower limbs crossed over each other. And so here we see that the retronasal triangle is more clear. Okay, that's the, yeah. Then I'll show you how to do the uterine artery. So first take the sagittal plane, switch on color, and look at the uterine artery on either side. So I've gone towards the left. So this is the left uterine artery. Document the PI. So we were on the left side. Now come towards the right. This is the right uterine artery. So this is the right uterine artery towards the right. And from the right we go, this is sagittal, we go towards the left. You find the left uterine artery and document it. Okay. Look at the cervical length. So this is normal. See the two medical arteries. Yeah. Let's do a TPS, is it? Let's do a TPS. Ah. That's up to Korea. After 20 weeks. So document the cervix. It's not necessary to document the uterine artery every time, I mean, but we can. The orbits. Look at the lenses. The pre-maxillary triangle, the two nasal bones, and these are the lips that just gone off the side. Okay, this is the sometimes we can document the aortic arch also. This is the aortic arch. So this is an ideal position to do a 3D of the spine, so the promoters are requested that I should show a 3D. Just take a sneeze. So this is the what about the applications? Nowadays this machine has got wonderful features. You just do this. These are the rates. And these are the bodies, the rates. So you can do a 3D spine in this. You can go at different modes, you can start playing around. 3D is very fascinating actually. It's like you can